Today we're in conversation with the Bristol Bike Project, which is a member-led cooperative operating out of Bristol. It's based in Stokes Croft and they repair and rehome bikes across the city. The outdoor company Milliken, which is based in the Lake District and makes really nice sustainable travel packs and bags, entered their film Meaningful Journey Connection into the Adventure Uncovered Film Festival this year. The film's about the Bristol Bike Project and about one of the founders, James Lucas. And it's brilliant. It blew our audience away and it won the Social Impact Award at the festival this year. So we're going to show you the film and then we're going to talk to James and two of the other core members of the Bristol Bike Project team, Krisha and Joe. Enjoy.
You know, for a lot of the people we work with, they've come to the UK and it's not because they've chosen to, but because their situation has meant that they've been forced to leave where they live and the family and friends and the work and the life they have there and the connections they have, and suddenly they find themselves, you know, in a foreign place without those connections and without that community, and having a bike will hopefully make it easier for them to forge a new community here. Pretty much all of the bikes that come in are donations from individuals. You know, some of them have sat in their sheds for years and not been used, and for many of the people that bring their bikes in, they wouldn't necessarily have any idea of how much difference that bike might make to someone's life. So Mohammed was referred to us to come and get a bicycle through the Earn a Bike programme, and he's at college and he's training to be a mechanic, and for him having a bicycle will really help enable him to get to college, get to and from college. You forget the human story there. The direct contact you have with people is, I think, absolutely key to building more resilient communities. What's not to love about riding a bike? You know, they're fabulous for both your physical and your mental health. They connect you to a place in a way that you don't get otherwise. Even if it's miles away, I know that if I put in the time and the energy, I can do it under my own steam and I'm not relying on anyone else. There's like a doing and a non-doing that sort of exists at the same point. Your bottom half is in motion and it's moving, and then the top can be quite still and there's space for thought. I guess the sort of independence to just be getting around on your own terms. The Earn a Bike programme is at the core of the Bristol Bike Project, and it's welcoming in people who wouldn't be able to access a bicycle, and they get to spend an afternoon or a morning fixing up a bike that they then get to take away. And rather than it just being a handout, it's part of a process that hopefully is much more empowering. Even if you took away all the bikes, the project is totally powered by people and breaking down a lot of barriers.
Hello and welcome to Adventure Uncovered Conversations. Today we're joined by James, Krisha and Joe from the brilliant Bristol Bike Project, which is a community interest company based out of Stokes Croft, Bristol. The Bristol Bike Project uses bikes as a vehicle for social change, for empowerment and for connection. Milliken entered the Meaningful Journey Connection film into the Adventure Uncovered Film Festival earlier this year, which just blew the audiences away. So guys, thanks so much for joining. Great to have you in conversation with us today. I think James, as a way to start, let's kick off with you. So you founded the Bristol Bike Project back in 2008. What was the initial aim and what was the initial idea? Where did it come from?
Well, a friend and I had been on a cycling trip out to Scandinavia, maybe kind of 8 months previously, and then we'd come back and talked about the idea of doing kind of, something involving bikes, a benevolent sort of a project. And I was volunteering at the Bristol Refugee Rights at the time, helping sort of teaching English. And with the time spent there and seeing how people were spending hours sort of getting to the Welcome Centre and the various other things that they were involved with, it made perfect sense to kind of start there and support that group of people. So my friend Colin and I just started advertising for bikes, just very informally, sort of friendship groups and emails and sticking a few posters up, and the bikes just sort of came flooding in really, and they've never stopped since. I think it's fair to say, it's such a large, it's such a big resource, unused, unwanted bikes. So they just came flooding in, and then Colin and I spent a couple of days pretty much every week. We were working together as well, in a self-employed capacity, doing sort of building and work and gardening and things. So we had this time that we carved out every week, where we'd spend fixing up these bikes and then bringing them to the Welcome Centre, and they kind of organised it their end as to who was the sort of priority, people who lived furthest away and that sort of thing. And then we worked getting the bikes out, and it was great, and it just went from there. And then eventually we sort of found the premises where the project still is now in Stokes Croft, maybe 6 months later, I think, which was amazing, because then it meant that we could invite people to come to the space to work with us, alongside us. So it felt like a shared enterprise. It wasn't us just doing it and then a kind of handout, which is how neither Colin or I wanted to do it. But in the early days, that was kind of just how it had to work to begin with. As soon as we could welcome people into a workshop and do it together, then that was the real, it all started making a lot more sense.
And is cycling something that you've always loved?
No, I can't. I mean, I used to sort of go mountain biking with friends when I was younger, but it wasn't until I was that bit older that I discovered it as a way of really incorporating it into a real sort of day-to-day existence, of getting around and making sense of a city, and it really being part of my life. And then I think the kind of taking that cycle trip, and rather than just sort of simply flying to Sweden where the work was, but actually making a trip of it and realizing we could do it under our own steam, albeit with a ferry in there as well. But getting there, and it was really exciting. That was certainly a real ignition point for wow, this is great, and wanting to share that with people. And I think in a city like Bristol as well, and I think most cities, it just makes so much sense. And it makes cities so much more pleasant, and I was talking to a friend just the other day about how nice Bristol's been recently, because there's been so fewer cars,
absolutely. It's the same here in London for sure.
And you were saying about how cycling had risen as well so much,
and they're expecting they're expecting a 10-fold increase in London, of cyclists over the next sort of few months looking ahead.
It's
You know,
tremendous.
it's a real silver lining. It's amazing, and obviously there's the investments that have just been committed into cycling infrastructure and, you know, end of ride facilities and all of that. Like, I think it really feels like this could be a real moment of change in terms of cycling, and seeing that not just in cities as a way of active travel, but I started to think of like, well, what, you know, if there's going to be more people cycling in London and Bristol and you know, all of the major cities, then what does that mean for cycling culture generally? And will that mean that people are taking more Sustrans routes and, you know, the coast to coast and the Way of the Roses? And I think it could be really, really exciting. And I think I want to come on to that and ask you, Joe and Krisha, about, you know, how that might positively impact the Bristol Bike Project. But let's just kind of rewind a little bit, and maybe Krisha, you can start. Tell us how the project has changed since its kind of initial conception slightly, and the work that you and Joe do now with the community programs and the women's night and the membership, of course.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, it's still in that same space, which is amazing. But the space has grown since those like early days that James talks about. The space just kind of they took on bit by bit, kind of growing into new spaces and creating a bigger community workshop and building it up bit by bit. So it's now a much bigger space.
Okay.
And it's basically packed throughout the week with community programs. So there's still the very like core stuff that was set up right at the start, the earner bike programs, where people come and they work alongside mechanics to learn some basic maintenance skills basically, and then they have that bike to take away. But then it's also been filled in with lots of drop-in repair workshops where people can come back with their bikes and keep learning new skills and keep their bikes on the road. It's kind of grown into doing women's only stuff as well. I mean, Joe I think was one of the founders of the women's night that we do on a Monday night, which has been going for, is it 9 years, Joe, or something?
Yeah.
So since very early on as well. And there's a women's only earner bike program. There's a young person's earner bike program. There's a young person's drop-in repair workshop. So it's kind of grown bit by bit. Now there's hardly a kind of time during the day when there isn't something going on in there, which is amazing, apart from right now, obviously. which is very sad to see the space so kind of empty and quiet. But generally it's a very bustling place. And I think, you know, the essence, the kind of what the project is about hasn't changed since James and Colin set it up. And that's something that is really amazing when we hear those kind of tales of how it all came about and what was really important to them at the start. To know that that's still very much the kind of guiding principle of what we're all doing there is really, really, really wonderful and really powerful, I think.
That must be testimony to the people that you brought on board and the people that you have running it, to be able to keep that kind of like the core essence of it, as you say. So I'm just interested in how it kind of runs, like the practicalities of it. So obviously there's these earner bike programs, and that whilst you initially started working with maybe, you know, asylum seekers, you now work, Chris, you were explaining to me, you work across different groups, women's groups, and you know, victims of domestic violence, and you know, all sorts of people who are able to benefit from working through the project. But for someone, you know, maybe just a kind of a member of the public, as it were, who comes into the bike shop, can they also buy a bike? Can they earn a bike? How does the services kind of work?
Yeah, I guess there's anybody who comes through the door, there's some way that they can be involved. So people who come through the door who have money, who earn money, they can buy a bike, they can get their bike repaired, they can come on one of our maintenance courses, they can donate, they can volunteer. There's all sorts of different ways that people can kind of get involved, whether or not that person is in a position to spend money or not. In terms of people who come for the earner bike programs now, like you say, it's a really kind of varied group of people. And again, I think that was something that was really established very early on in the project. As James said, there was this partnership with Bristol Refugee Rights, but it was very early on that there was a kind of demand there from lots of different people saying, hang on a minute, I could really do with a bike and I can't afford one, or organisations getting in touch and saying, you know, it would really help if you could get bikes to the people that we're working with. So it was very early on that it started growing into working with lots of different people from all walks of life and different referral organisations as well.
Yeah. Okay. And Jo, Krisha was telling me that you, amongst all of the other things you do, are very involved with the kind of the membership of the project. And and I understand that it's a cooperative. When did it become a cooperative? And can you tell us a bit about that structure?
Yeah, of course. I think it was a cooperative right from the get-go, JL, wasn't it? Did you set it up?
Yeah, pretty much. I think maybe the first 2 years we were just running as a kind of unincorporated organisation, and then maybe 18 months in, we sort of, when we decided we needed a bank account and we couldn't keep taking sort of bags of cash up to pay our rent, and we needed to do things a bit more officially. It was then actually. Yeah, you're right, Jo. So we sort of incorporate then as a cooperative. It felt like the best fit.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think it was interesting you were talking about this feeling that it still holds on to this thing from the very start, where it still has that kind of essence. And I think that is mainly to do with being a co-op. And I think because a co-op, you can respond, we have membership. Anyone who volunteers at the project, any service user, can become a member of the co-op, and then they are best placed, because they're volunteering in the project every day, to sense any problems or shifts that need to happen, and then the mechanisms are there for them to make those changes and be empowered to make those changes. So being a co-op really puts the community at the heart of all the decision making process. So we're not like a top-down thing. There's no one in charge or making decisions. Krisha and I are there to kind of facilitate and help bring people together to make those decisions. So it kind of it feels like it keeps things in check. Like when I first joined the project was through Women's Night, which had been set up maybe a year before I joined, and those amazing women who were running that project were members. And I remember going to my first meeting and them being there representing my thoughts that they'd checked in with me about, and it felt straight away like I can instigate change here. I can bring up things that I want to happen, which is really empowering. So And
how many members are there now? Are there currently?
We've got about 90 active members.
Okay. Yeah. And so you meet sort of regularly to check in, or is there formal structures like that, or do people kind of just feed through feedback as you go along?
Yeah, we have about five meetings a year, 1 AGM and 4 general meetings, where we encourage as many members to meet as possible. And then we also have something called the Ops group, which stands for kind of operational group, and that they meet every single month, and that's formed of reps from each of the community programs and also somebody from the bike shop as well, to kind of represent the voice of the volunteers and the people in that part of the project. So we meet and we try and make decisions about things like operational things that we can decide there and then without necessarily having to ask every single member. But if it is something that affects the membership, then we'll always take that decision to the members. So the big decisions are made by the members, and kind of smaller things done by Ops group.
And that membership body, are they primarily local people based in Bristol?
Absolutely, yeah. They're people. You have to be a volunteer before you can become a member. So they are volunteers and staff. Basically, they're made up of our community, and we really try and encourage people who come to the project, maybe who come to do an earn a bike. We always try and encourage them to come back and volunteer if they want to, and then once they're volunteering, try and encourage them to become a member. So we've got as a diverse range of members as we can.
Okay. And you were saying that you kind of came across the Bristol Bike Project by going to one of the women's nights. Okay. And Krisha, how did you get involved?
So I got involved. Well, I'd heard about the Bristol Bike Project like years before I got involved, and didn't live in Bristol at the time, and thought, oh my God, when I get to Bristol one day, I'm going to move to Bristol and I'm going to get involved in this amazing project. And then I was living in London and had started learning some mechanics and was volunteering at a couple of smaller kind of bike project-y type things, and was gearing up for this move to Bristol. And I wasn't quite sure why I was moving to Bristol, but it was just happening. And I think a week before I was due to move, I saw someone sent me this job ad at the Bristol Bike Project, and I was like, no, that can't be true. Like that's my dream job. And I can't even imagine that it's possible to get jobs in places like this. And so I applied and got the job sort of a few weeks after moving to Bristol. And I'd already started, as soon as I got to Bristol, I started volunteering and was going along to the volunteer nights where we prep bikes for the earner bikes. So it was all a bit of a kind of whirlwind of introduction. And then suddenly I was working there, and it was all a bit too good to be true, really. Yeah.
Brilliant. I want to like talk about like cycling and how important the kind of the bike element is to the Bristol Bike Project. Because I was thinking about it the other day, and I thought, because like I absolutely love cycling, and I'm a big cyclist, and I'd also heard about the Bristol Bike Project before we saw the film, and I just thought, you know, would it be the same if it was like the Bristol Running Project? And then I thought, oh well, there's not really a kind of workshop involved with running, so maybe not. So then I was thinking a bit more, and I was like, well, would it work if it was like the Bristol like motor car society, right? Have like, because there is a workshop involved in that.
Yeah.
And I just like, you know, James, like how important is cycling to the Bristol Bike Project? I know that's kind of like, it might sound like a silly question, but there's something, Krisha, you say in one of the, I think it's the Tea and Tinkering films, where you say, you know, the people are the most important part of this project. And how important is the cycling?
Yeah, the cycling, I mean, it is really important. Obviously, that's the kind of the way in. I think for me, you know, you get some people that are like mad on it, and they get, you know, they love all the technical stuff and get really geeky, and I've never been that way at all. So I've always been much more interested in the people side of it, and what the bikes facilitate, really, and working on the bikes, what they can facilitate, and how, you know, over the course of a 3-hour earner bike session where you're working one-to-one with someone, and you know, the sorts of conversations you can have, if people want to have them, and there's a kind of space and a sort of I guess there's this kind of a space around working on bikes that perhaps you wouldn't get with other things, like if you're working on cars, or you know, and having done bits of that myself, I can't quite see how it would work the same way. Whereas if you're working on a bike with someone, you're sort of, you know, you're close enough that you can have a conversation, and there's the kind of, I don't know how to describe, like the ebb and flow of the sorts of mechanics that you do during one of those sessions allows for a sort of conversation to take place. And obviously the idea is that you're, you know, the coordinator, or the person working with the earner biker is encouraging them to do as much as they can. And it's always been, I've always loved how naturally you can sort of really strike up sort of conversation and a friendship in that sort of space of time. And I think then the kind of the sort of bigger workshop space, you know, we all work really hard to ensure that is kept feeling, you know, feels like a safe and sort of nourishing space to be in. And I think that's really crucial as well. You know, and that can be, you know, can be challenged at points, and it's a continuous, you know, continuous bit of work, I suppose, making sure that the workshop is how we collectively want it to be, so that it feels supportive and safe for people to be in. So the bikes are really important, obviously, but the kind of melting pot of people that are at the project as a result of them is the thing that really excites me. But it's an interesting one, what you say about whether it would work with other things. I know a few sort of friends who run various sort of growing projects, you know, growing food, or and I feel like that's a really great space to do similar things as well. Kind of real sort of gentleness there around doing that.
And I think there's something in like having a task or an activity that really helps people open up, right?
Yeah.
And it's like that slight distraction, you know, that you're doing something together and people really start to talk more. And actually it's funny that you mentioned the growing projects, because I find that when you're doing something like potting things in a garden or, you know, whatever it is, people are able to, it's like their mind relaxes, right?
Yeah.
They, like you get past yourself and you're able to really to chat more. And
yeah, that's absolutely right, Rosie. Yeah, totally.
I think it's something we definitely felt like, as well as the thing that the bike does in terms of giving people independence and freedom and physical and mental health. There's something about being in the workshop and working on a shared task, which has meant that people who would normally really find those kind of environments very difficult, and through social anxiety and you know, just challenges about being in group spaces, are able to enter the workshop and work on that shared task, because, as you say, there's a kind of distraction of something which is, there's not pressure on somebody to disclose who they are or what's going on for them, but they can get involved in a shared task, and then that just opens up space for connection. I think a bike is a really amazing way of doing that, because it's so visual and physical. Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not too challenging. It's not like, you know, a bike, you can teach somebody mechanics. I think often, well, I had this experience when I first came to Women's Night. I didn't really know what on earth I was doing with a bike. But I very quickly felt quite empowered by the fact that I could grasp this mechanical information and I could learn how to look after this thing myself. And being able to cycle and owning your own bike is like the first level of some kind of empowerment. Like, I can go wherever I want, when I want, and I can get myself there. And then learning the mechanics of how to look after that bike is like another level of empowerment, because when you're off in the middle of nowhere, you know that you're not going to be stuck. You're not going to have to ask for help. You might be able to do it yourself if you've got a couple of tools in your bag and a bit of knowledge. Yeah, so I really enjoyed that process and wanted to, I think that's what made me want to like stick with the project, and because it felt really important for me.
I can totally relate to that, Jo. I think I remember the first ever cycle tour I went on, I had no knowledge about bikes whatsoever, and I was on the other side of the world, and I was trying to get this bike built up in this workshop, and it was all in Spanish, and I didn't even know the words in English, and it was all very and then I was on cycling, and luckily my friend knew some mechanics, but there was no bike shops around because we were in the middle of nowhere all the time. And I just kept thinking, like, next time I do this, I'm promising to myself that I am going to be able to fix the problems when they arise. And I remember the next time I went cycling on a tour, and I knew things like, I can fix a puncture, I can sort my brakes out. It was the most freeing kind of experience of like, I don't need to worry about that thing, like you say, of someone else helping me. I'm relying on myself, and I can get myself there.
And
you don't need that much. You can do it with just a bit of knowledge as well.
And I think it's something that's so great about the Bike Project is that when you come in, you don't feel that you don't feel like you need any understanding. You don't feel like you need to already have a lot of knowledge. And I think that's a real testament to the people who work in the bike shop as well. For customers coming in, quite often that can be quite a horrible experience, going into a bike shop and just feeling like you need to be able to, you're not quite sure if they're gonna judge your level of knowledge or maybe kind of rip you off or whatever, but they're really kind to people who come in, and they don't suppose that they're going to know what the problem is or judge them when they don't. So it's like, you
very
don't
human,
have a fancy bike. It's just about anyone can cycle, anyone can have a bike, and it's for the joy of the ride rather than this like high tech.
They're very like democratic with their knowledge, basically, aren't they? It's like very happy to pass on knowledge rather than keeping it to themselves.
That's exactly it.
And do you go out on rides as a group?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we organise volunteer rides. There's kind of an official one every season, and then the volunteers between themselves organise loads more in between as well. So we try and get as many people out.
And do you get people from the Earn a Bike programs coming on those rides as well as members and volunteers?
We always try and invite as many people as possible. And we do sometimes have people from Earn a Bike coming, but not as much as we'd like. It would be great to have more.
I think it happens more when we do the short, well, every year we do this annual birthday ride for Chips, and that's the one that seems to attract the most like diverse and biggest group of people.
Yeah.
And I think partly because it's it's a very accessible ride, it's not too far, it's flat, but also there's chips at the end of it, so, and it's kind of encouraged to be fancy dressed as well, so people enjoy coming along on their silly bikes and wearing Christmas get up.
Yeah, there's nothing like food to bring people together.
I think the chips thing has become, even any ride now, it's just like, but where are the chips? When are we going to have the chips?
Before we've even set off. It's just start a chip job. So I guess with the current situation then, the workshop's never been quieter. When did you make the decision to close, and how are you adapting to everything that's going on?
We closed all the community workshops pretty much at the start of lockdown. I think it was the 20th.
It was before lockdown even.
Right. 23rd of March, I think it was, somewhere around that. Yeah, we made the decision to close the community workshops because they are big groups of people joining together. So it wasn't safe to carry on. So since then we've made loads of adjustments to how we work. We've furloughed quite a lot of staff, and we've kind of stripped back to a really minimal service. So the bike shop, there's just 3 members of staff working in there at the moment, and they're repairing bikes and selling bikes to key workers only.
Okay.
And then our community programs, we're just running a minimal Earn a Bike service where Chris has been doing loads of work reaching out to people to see who is still in need of a bike or an urgent repair, and we're like doing a few of those a week in the workshop, but without those people coming in to the workshop. It's kind of like right, so they're not being taught how to fix the bike like they would normally. It's more like we give them the bike out the door. But we're hoping to increase it slowly but surely.
It must be difficult because it's not, as we've been saying, it's not just about providing a bike to people, right? It's actually the process of the person being able to come into the project and have a tea and chat and have that social aspect. So I mean, is there a way that you can try, and have you been able to find a way to sort of enable that social aspect and check in with people, at risk groups, more vulnerable groups? What are you thinking about that?
Well, we've done a lot for our volunteers. So we set up this phone call network where we hooked up volunteers with other volunteers who might be socially isolated. So they get a phone call once a week, which is like a befriending call, where we're just checking in to chat about bikes. And then, Krisha, would you like to talk about the Earn a Bike outreach stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the honest truth is that's just really hard. Like, apart from we, as Jo says, we've got this kind of phone call network. So people who are part of our Earn a Bike community who we know could do with a phone call. We've been kind of reaching out to people to see if they want that kind of social contact. And I'm speaking to Earn a Bikers kind of every week who need repairs and that kind of thing. But it's amazing to be able to still provide that kind of mechanical support for people and to give bikes, but there isn't really a replacement for the ability to all get together in a workshop and hang out, and the informality of it all. So that does feel like a big loss and something that we're really, really missing at the moment. And I think the first part of this whole kind of thing for us has been a lot about shifting and adjusting and trying to get an understanding of where we're at and what our survival strategy is as a community business and all of that kind of thing. And it feels like we've reached a point of we've got some really good systems in place and we're able to support people who really need it. And now's the time for us to also start thinking more creatively about, okay, well, what happens if it's another year before we're able to open the community workshops again? How do we make sure that we can still do something which replaces that kind of the human contact that you get from just being able to come into the workshop when, you know, so many of our workshops are very free and easy as well. They kind of drop in and people come and go as they please, and it's as much a kind of community hub as it is a bike workshop. You know, people just come in for a cuppa or that kind of thing. So we've got to really kind of think creatively about how we address that if this goes on for a long time.
Yes.
But yeah, it's hard. It's a hard fact.
Yeah. And I mean, people can still go out on rides. So have you been encouraging people to go out on cycles?
We have.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we've been sharing recommended rides and favourite tours and favourite places and lots of stuff like that to try and collect together all the volunteers' top tips and recommendations. Yeah.
Is the chip shop still open?
I don't think so.
It's a pub, so unfortunately.
It might be serving out the window, you never know. We should check.
And I guess lastly, just to talk about what, you know, as we were saying earlier, there might be the silver lining out of this whole you know, situation at the moment, whereby actually we see a rise in cycling and therefore potentially an increased need for the services that the project offers, you know, not just bike fixing, but also, you know, encouraging more people to ride and building confidence and things like that. How are you sort of anticipating that, and are you preparing for that kind of potential growth?
We are anticipating that, I suppose. Not kind of, we haven't been having formal conversations about, okay, what do we do when there's increased demand, but we're very aware that there's just 3 people spannering in the shop at the moment, and they're rushed off their feet, selling bikes like they've hardly built a bike before they've sold it. And interestingly, you know, we've just been thinking about the reasons why this is happening, and there's some people are saying that they're cycling for the first time. It's the first time they've decided to commute. Some people are kind of dusting off bikes that they've had in their shed for years and saying, okay, now's the time to get back into cycling. It's not everybody, but there's definitely a kind of big portion of people who are, this is them getting into cycling for the first time. So I think there's a clear trend that we're seeing. I mean, the thing that we've always struggled with over the past years is that we can't actually increase capacity because we're at capacity in our space. But we are moving, fingers crossed. I mean, that's, you know, there's a lot of question marks obviously on the kind of timescales with everything that's going on, but before this all hit, our biggest thing that we've been doing for the past year or even 2 years was preparing for a move to a new premise, which has more space, so it does allow us to kind of think about how we might be able to serve more people and run more community programs, and so watch this space, I suppose. But
and get everyone in Bristol on 2 wheels.
Yeah, exactly. That would be the aim.
Have
more
you
than 2 wheels?
So is there other like Bristol Bike Project? James, did people ever ask you to help them kind of set one up in, I'm from Newcastle, right? So I just wondered if people ever asked you to kind of help set one up in other places, in other cities.
We've had over the years lots of people come to visit who are interested in doing that, and somewhere there might be some, I don't know actually, if there's I started a sort of spreadsheet at one point of kind of keeping a track of all these people that have come to speak to us.
We've still got it.
Have you still got it? Dust it off and bring it out. It's like it's still there. So yeah, so we've done a lot of sort of I mean, not a lot, but we've done quite a fair bit of that sort of work, you know, certainly welcoming people in that are interested in trying to start something themselves, and then just the nature of the bike project, just, you know, really willing to share, you know, kind of openly where we're at, and various sort of documents that would help make it, you know, much easier for them to get going quicker and that sort of thing. There are, I mean, I'm not still quite as involved in the scene as I was at one point, but there certainly were a lot in the UK at one point of sort of community bike projects.
Yeah.
And there were we were having a couple of annual meetings where the kind of all the bike projects would gather and come together and sort of skill share and that sort of thing. And that was good. That was a while back, but yeah, I don't know, Joe, Christian, do you find there's still people sort of getting in touch about?
There's still
all the time.
Yeah. People who are setting something up, or people who are running a small place and they want to expand and they want to understand how we've done it and get advice.
Okay.
It happens a lot, and people from all over the world as well. Someone from Santa Cruz came recently. Yeah,
no, someone from France. So yes, France, Spain, Germany. I feel like it's kind of an international calling to down to Bristol.
It's a really nice network.